Okay, hi everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. This is our, I believe, 70th Med Mentor Monday panel, and today we'll be talking about, I guess the name of the session is like pre-med timeline, but really it's just a bunch of like different aspects of pre-med life built into one. I think I just want to make it clear before we start, there is no one correct timeline. There are many different paths to medicine. But maybe today we'll get to hear about some of the paths that these current DGSOM students have taken to get to medicine. And so I also want to mention that for those of you who are viewing live, we have a Q&A function. And you can feel free to submit questions through that Q&A box at any point. I think there's an option to submit questions anonymously, or you can you can have your name on it. And it's fun when people send in questions in real time because sometimes we'll answer the question live, and then other times the panelists will just type an answer for you and I think for everyone else to see. So it's really fun if you can get questions in. Okay, let me make you a co-host. Okay, so you can turn your video on. Okay, and so with all that said, maybe we can go ahead and start off with some introductions. If you guys can go around and just say like your name, what year you're in, and then maybe like what your major in undergrad was. I don't know, something random. Okay.
I can go first, I guess. My name's Haiti. I'm an MS1, and I went to UCLA for undergrad. I was a molecular bio major.
I can go. My name is Juliana or Julie. I'm also an MS1 and first year student at DGSOM. And I went to Tufts for my undergrad and I double majored in biology and sociology.
Hi everyone, my name is Anais. I'm an MS2 at DGSOM. I went to UCI for undergrad and majored in general bio.
Hi everyone, my name is Vishnu. I'm an MS4 at UCLA. Went to Berkeley for undergrad where I actually studied economics. And so I don't know if I was supposed to answer another question, but yeah, just happy to be here and happy to help.
Hey y'all, I'm Faraz. I'm an MS4. I went to University of Toronto. I'm Canadian in Toronto and did neuroscience and psych. Happy to be here answering y'all's question.
Great. Thank you all for joining again. So maybe we can go ahead and get started with some questions. So I guess this is more geared towards those of you who are not STEM majors. If anyone was not a STEM major, how did you fit in the required science classes for med school? And actually, sorry, let me interrupt one more time. So there's a note here that I wanted to say, which is that you can always check the AAMC website for school-specific course requirements, but typically most schools will require at least 2 semesters with lab of biology, general chemistry, organic chemistry, and physics, and then 1 semester, or I don't know how that works with the quarters, of English. Just wanted to say that first. But yeah, for those of you who are not STEM majors, how did you fit in the required science classes?
I can take this one. So I was economics and I declared econ, if I remember correctly, at the end of my sophomore year of college, so pretty late on. But I always knew that I was going to be pre-med, so I had this interest in health policy and health economics, and so that was kind of what my angle was with that major. I think in terms of fitting in requirements, I'd already taken most of the lower division classes. I think the benefit of being econ was that I had some flexibility with some of the additional requirements because I didn't have to necessarily take a pre-med requirement in order to declare like a bio major, for example, because a lot of the bio majors already have all the pre-med prereqs as like mandatory lower division courses before declaring the major. So because I was econ, I was able to have a little bit more flexibility taking like physics during 3rd year of college or some lab courses closer to like my fourth year. So I think if anything, it made it a little bit easier as a non-STEM major because I kind of had flexibility to intersperse some pre-med requirements kind of as the years went on, as opposed to being pressured to take it like earlier on in undergrad. So yeah, I think that was generally my approach.
Okay. I think you might have been the the only one without like a sciencey major, unless I'm wrong and anyone else wants to chime in. Okay, great, thank
I
you.
did sociology alongside bio, but I would say all of my biology major covered the majority of my pre-med requirements, and then it was just kind of balancing out throughout the years of like where I would fit in the remaining few that were outside of both majors, but also additional classes I had to take. So yeah, so I didn't have like I wasn't not a STEM major, but I did navigate both. So if you have any questions on that.
Great, thank you for that. We've started getting some questions in the Q&A, so I don't know if anyone has any opinions on this, but someone asked, is taking an online prereq UCLA summer class looked down upon by med schools, or does it make it harder to get into med school? So it seems like the concern is with taking an online prereq summer class. I don't know if anyone has any opinions on that.
I can speak to that because I went to UCLA and I took summer classes online. But I don't think so. I'm not totally sure. The circumstances for me might have been a little bit different because we were forced to take it online because it was COVID. But I think in terms of like the class being a shorter period of time and over the summer doesn't like necessarily make it any worse. It's still a UCLA class and you're still getting the same content and material in. So as long as you feel like that's feasible for you, I don't see it's why it would be a problem.
I also remember for Berkeley, there were also a couple of courses where there was like a W option where like the same course was being offered online along with like being offered live. And there were also a couple of like online stats classes as well, which I did take and I never had any issue with any of those. I think the only thing I would say is that if I remember correctly, the online courses tended to have like usually lower grades just because holding yourself accountable in an online class is generally more challenging. And so even if it was similar course material, I think having an online course can just make it a little harder to hold yourself accountable for like meeting deadlines and things like that. I know I certainly had that issue of like cramming more because I was allowed to cram more versus I think just the accountability that comes with an in-person experience. But otherwise, I don't recall anybody ever like asking any questions about like that specific online course in my transcript.
I can also speak to that because I think similar to Haiti, also part of my college experience ended up being online. So I would say probably like a third of my, like between my junior and senior year, a third of my pre-med requirements ended up being online. And even before then, like before that COVID switch happened, I also took, I think, physics online over the summer. I know I didn't go to UCLA or like California schools, so I don't know if it'll differ, but I never had any issues. No one ever questioned why I took anything online. It was still coming from my institution and it was still like accredited and there were no issues. I also kind of think that some of the stigma around online classes has shifted a lot because of like COVID and like how much more prevalent like this virtual world and like teaching method is. So
Totally. I mean, Vishnu, Fairnaz, and I did most of med school online because we started when COVID started. So if it's good enough for med school, it's good enough for undergrad. Okay, thank you for that. So this is going to be a more broad, like open-ended question, but is there anything I should consider when scheduling classes? And this may be related to like being strategic and scheduling difficult classes with easier classes, or like maintaining a good course load? Is that necessary? Like, does it matter if I take a quarter or two where I'm barely taking any classes? Or any thoughts about planning classes around taking the MCAT? Honestly, anything like you want to comment?
I guess I can start with that. I think it's definitely helpful to be like a little bit strategic in kind of scheduling more difficult classes in terms of like balancing with less difficult classes in a specific quarter or semester. Um, which is kind of what I did like throughout undergrad. I always tried to balance, like if I had two really difficult classes, like, like a neuropharm class and I don't know, some other like biochemistry class. I tried to balance it with like a little less heavy and intense elective classes or whatnot, just so I don't jeopardize my grade across like all of the classes. And I'm able to juggle. And I don't think there's a right answer to that, honestly. It just really depends on, your own capabilities and what you know yourself best and what you can juggle and, handle throughout a certain semester or quarter. Like if you have something, going on in personal life or like extracurriculars or research or whatnot that requires your attention more there, maybe being strategic about what class you take in that quarter versus like later. And then as far as like planning around the MCAT, I would also say like I personally took my MCAT during a gap year, so that I can't really speak to that, but I think as much as you can to schedule like less intense courses around that like MCAT time, maybe like a month or two prior, you really want to put your attention and focus onto the exam so that you don't put yourself in a position where you're kind of jeopardizing the course grade as well as like your MCAT score. You want to like devote your full attention to the exam just to do it like once or twice and move on and not have to repeat it many times.
I think I would also say, like, for course planning, like, try to take, if you know you're taking the MCAT, like, summer of junior year or immediately after graduating, try to time when you take, like, your biochemistry or your psychology courses. I think closer to the MCAT, I think those are very, like, memorization heavy courses. So if you can memorize something for an exam, like, that's great because now you don't have to memorize it from scratch for the MCAT itself. So, like, try to time some of the more memorization intensive prereqs to be closer to your MCAT so you have that information fresh prior to taking the MCAT itself. I think in general for me, I try to take like 2 technical classes per semester and then 1 like breadth course or 1 like elective course, and that generally like worked pretty well. I think taking more than 2 technical classes, like 2 like chemistry, physics, bio classes can get a little intense. And I think the breadth class was personally nice to just like take my mind off the more like intense pre-med courses.
I can also echo that, and I would also say um, like I think Anais was saying about like it's kind of depending on you and like your needs and like you know yourself best. And I think ultimately like organization is key. Like, and I think thinking about it ahead is definitely useful. Like I used to always keep like a spreadsheet of, especially like as I was like juggling like the multiple majors and stuff and figuring out where I wanted to take like put stuff in and when to finish things. Because I also didn't I took I studied for my MCAT at the end of my junior year, like and summer of that junior year into senior year. So I also didn't have to do as much simultaneously. But I do think the organization, regardless, was just like so helpful. Like planning ahead a little bit, like look at your major, look at all the classes you have to take, and then think about like, okay, if you do want to do this application, if you do want to take this exam, like the MCAT, then like what can you organize there? Like it's always just helpful to look ahead for anyone, whether they're um planning to take it planning to take the MCAT during school or not. It just will be like really useful in the long run too, and it's good skills to like work on.
I just want to just like a small, agree with everything y'all are saying, but I wasn't a pre-med and under not a pre-med advice in general. Like I realized early on, I took a psych course, realized I really like it and I was doing well. So I just continued taking it, did a minor in it. I think it's very individualized. If you take a subject, you just are enjoying it, it's filling your credits, you know. It was a different credit system in Canada, but same idea applies here, I'm sure. So, you know, and you're getting good grades in it. I think it's going to be great for you. It happened to also be a thing that's helpful on the MCAT, which worked out for me. But you know, it doesn't have to be that. So I think just also figure out what you like and what you're good at, and use that to your advantage to also, you know, kind of enjoy undergrad and get something else out of it too. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, on the topic of the MCAT, maybe just one more MCAT question and then we can move on. And I think some of you have already started talking about this, but what are your thoughts on taking the MCAT prior to taking all of your relevant undergrad courses, and how early in advance did you begin studying? This is to answer that question on the live.
I think it's probably, I mean, I'm not sure how like in-depth your scientific background is and all of that, but I think it would be pretty hard to study for the MCAT without having taken the courses before, because I think it usually takes you like 2 years in undergrad to get through all the courses that you technically need to take the MCAT, and self-studying is just really hard and taxing and on top of classes that you're taking at school. I'm not sure how easy that would be, and I think it's probably not worth it to like spend all that time studying when you could just learn it in school anyways, alongside your peers. So I would probably recommend taking the classes first and then studying for the MCAT. Not sure if anybody else did it the opposite way and has anything to say about that. And then personally for me, I studied for the MCAT for I think 3-ish months. And I did it over the summer, so I wasn't taking any classes alongside it. I was just doing research, and then studying when I had time.
I can also speak to it because this is I feel like something that I really debated when I was in undergrad. Because I originally wanted to go straight through, like apply while I was a junior, basically, I'm kind of forgetting the process now, but apply to go straight in like after graduating. And so I started to self-study, and do it without having taken like I think like 4 or 5 of my like pre-health classes. And like I agree with Haiti, like it's really tough to self-study because you're like it's all self-motivation, which like I have faith that everyone is like very driven and like motivated to do stuff. It just is like hard without any guidance. And when I had this conversation with my advisor, she was also not super for it. And so I think everyone like will have their own circumstances for it, but I personally had chosen to make that decision without with being like just too behind on coursework, and then I was trying to learn off of just like the MCAT books, and it just like wasn't sufficient to get like the knowledge base that I needed. And I also admit that like my learning style is like very visual, and I like working with others. Like I'm a collaborative person when it comes to studying, so it was a tough thing to study. And I did it for a couple months till I eventually like talked it out with my advisor and decided against it. So you know yourself best as always, and I think it like that will be the ultimate factor in a lot of these questions. But at least in my experience, it was pretty tough. It was pretty taxing, and ultimately like I didn't end up like going forward with it. Like I ended up taking the requirements I needed and then doing the MCAT.
I think on top of that too, just to add one more thing, is I think the general consensus is that like 70% of MCAT studying is doing practice questions and like getting used to the testing style and like the type of questions they'll ask you. So most of like what I think most people do to study for the MCAT is not learning new content. It's mostly like working with the content that you already know. So you would just be adding like a whole nother like part of studying that a lot of people typically don't even really invest a lot of time in.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe we can move on to some extracurriculars. I know we're getting some questions in the Q&A about like research and shadowing and stuff. So maybe we can start off with some like shadowing and patient care experiences. So do you have any advice for finding shadowing and patient care experiences? And is this something that you did throughout undergrad or something that you did after undergrad? When did this happen for you?
I think in general, when it comes to like direct patient care, I think my recommendation would be seek out an activity where you have a more active role in patient care that you can talk about more at length in either a personal statement, activities section of the application, or during interviews. Shadowing, I mean, I would maybe do it for a few days just to say that you kind of know what like the day-to-day of a doctor's life is like. But in general, I think I did probably like 30 to 40 hours of shadowing over just a few days for all of undergrad, just everything prior to med school, because I feel like that was just a very passive role. And I feel like just doing that a few times to get a feel for what a physician does was sufficient. For patient care experiences, I think it can be really broad. I think anything where you have a direct role in patient care that you can speak about in, subsequent applications or interviews is really the key. I think something longitudinal would be ideal because then you can take on more leadership positions in that organization, or you have, more, roles and responsibilities that you've accumulated. But I think the key, regardless of whether it's longitudinal or not, is just making sure that you can speak to the specific role that you played in that organization, when you're applying.
Yeah, I would say I think it's really important to find something that you've done for a while, so you know what you actually did, why was it important, why did you do it, and then be able to really talk about it, throughout your application and then during the interviews, right? And it doesn't, like what I did was, I mean, I would recommend it if you like this, but I worked in a, I think it was an endocrinology clinic in the hospital. I volunteered there and I was just doing like vitals, but that's like, you're having some patient at least facing role, doing something clinical, right? You get to build a rapport with the, staff there, with the clinicians and so on, really kind of get, I would say, and then I did that for like 2 years or more. So that was, I could really talk about it because I've been doing it for a while. And then similarly, I would say for research, if, same idea, really make sure you're passionate about it, make sure you, work actually on the projects, what you're doing, you spend time on it, and then it really shows that you're passionate about it. Like that's really something that I kept, hearing, not just, but, myself, but like the mentees, my friends. I mean, it just really shows if you're really engaged and you actually spend time and work on something, as opposed to you just kind of are trying to check some boxes. And I know it's hard, but like you just try to find something you're passionate about. And like I was typing, there's really so many different types of research, right? I did basic science for my master's, realized that's great, but I like clinical stuff. So I've been doing that throughout med school. And there's like epidemiology, stats, like so many different things you can do. QI. And then the only other thing I would say is, in terms of other extracurriculars, I would say find, at least for me, I had my, clinical stuff, I had my research, but then I think the other thing that was really important and helpful for me was that I really like mentorship and teaching. So I've just been doing that throughout undergrad. Like even though I was a pre-med, I wasn't a pre-med, and then during grad school. So I just, there's a good, like it's important to find things you're passionate about, because then throughout your application, as you
she cut off for you guys too? Oh no.
I think she's frozen.
Oh,
Oh,
you were
guys,
frozen
can you
just
hear
for like
me?
the last bit. We can hear you now.
Sorry, I guess the only other thing I wanted to say was that it's really helpful if you're doing things you're passionate about, because then you can put a cohesive story together as to why you want to do medicine. Like, so for example, for me, that was I did research, med ed, I want to do academia, I want to be a doctor, right? On top of all the patient care stuff. So like, make sure you have those pieces so you're making that cohesive story when you're writing your application, right? And it's great if those are true, because then you actually want to do academia. So that's nice, right? That was my long spiel on it.
If I can just piggyback on that, I think I agree with, pretty much everything she just said. But the most important thing is just remember to do what's true to yourself and what you're passionate about and things that you can speak about and kind of formulate your story around instead of just trying to do like cookie cutter checklist type of things. Because when I look at my classmates now, there's like, so much diversity. So many people have done so many different things, come from like different careers. Someone was a real estate agent for, so many years. Someone was a teacher for so many years. Someone was a pharmacist or a PA or whatnot, and now they're in med school. So it's like there is no real formula or a checklist that'll kind of get you that admission or magically help you get in. It's just literally like what you make of whatever situation or circumstance that you are in, and whatever activity or volunteer extracurricular thing that you do that is passionate, that follows your passion. So for example, like I was really passionate about underserved care, health disparities, serving the underserved. So I did a lot of like free clinic work, mobile projects, street medicine, and in addition to like mentorship stuff. So that's kind of like my two big like areas of interest. So that's what I've kept doing. That's been like the big theme that I followed throughout undergrad and med school. So it's just like pick one or two themes that you're passionate about and kind of just follow. And you should be good to go. And remember, it's not like a checklist that you have to check off. So it's okay if you don't have like a certain, research publication or whatnot. It doesn't mean that you won't get into any med school if you don't have any research at all or any publications. Because I myself didn't really have publications. I did have research for multiple years, but no, I had a few abstracts, but not like first author publication. So it's not like a recipe for disaster if you don't have like, those few things here and there.
I feel like I definitely echo what everyone is saying, and feel like not to like in an effort not to be redundant, I feel like based off of what everyone says, there are 2 points that like I feel like I want to make in terms of that. Because I know the question is also asking like how do you get these opportunities? And so like I really want to emphasize like cold email, like ask for help, like don't be afraid, like tell people that you have these interests, tell people that you're looking. Like I know it's intimidating because like there are professionals, there are like physicians, or like if it's even working with your professor, like there are a lot of power dynamics, but like there's no shame in like talking about your interests, talking like asking for help in something that you want to do. Because a lot of people honestly are like really excited to like work with like fresh faces who like have an interest in what they're doing. Like you can talk to a professor about their research, for example, at school and be like, hey, I like this because XYZ, like they're gonna love that you're interested in it. And like it won't like always be 100% across the board. Like not everyone is going to email you back and like not everyone is going to say yes, but like don't be afraid to email and to look and to ask and to be like, hey, do you know someone who does this? Or like ask your professor if they know of someone else who does like XYZ, like take that, like use that to your advantage. I know UCLA probably has bigger classes. Tufts was a little bit smaller, but like so it's harder, I guess, to get, I don't know how your office hours work and stuff, but like don't be afraid to like go to office hours and like just for things that like are things you're interested in, not necessarily for school. Like these are cool opportunities where you have like a close enough like contact with all of your professors to be able to like show show what you care about and are interested in, and like see if anyone is willing to help or take you on or give you advice or connect you with someone else. Like these are like really valuable resources. So like don't be afraid. Like don't be afraid of someone saying no. Like if they said no, okay, like thank you, next. Like let's email this other person. Like let's work on something else. And then the other point that I wanted to make is like I know a lot of people talk about passions, and passion is like a strong word. And sometimes it's hard. I think in like undergrad, like you're like afraid of like you're unsure what you're passionate about, and you can hear a lot of people talking about how they're intensely passionate about XYZ things. And that won't always be the case. Like I think that some people really find their thing really fast, and like that's like something they like yearn for, and it's something they're gonna carry on like for like forever, and like that's fantastic. But also like don't be afraid to like to admit to yourself like, okay, I don't have like this crazy passion, but I have all these interests, like I have all these things that I like do that too. Like follow the things that you enjoy, follow the things that like are fun to you, because like ultimately like this process is just intense and can be very draining, and there's a lot of comparison, and like it's good to find things that actually make you happy and that you are interested in, you want to learn more about, you like, and that can develop into the passions as well. So don't be discouraged if you don't feel like you have this thing that you're like crazy passionate about, because I think it takes a lot of time to develop, and there are ways that like you can still explore and have fun and like make this process unique to you, and like yeah.
Great, thank you for all these answers. It seems like we kind of I think some people already mentioned about research, and I didn't ask that like as a separate question, but that was totally fine. I'm happy you guys were able to share both. I just wanted to give an opportunity if anyone like wants to add anything else about research that they didn't get to say, like is it necessary or anything like that. If not, we can move on to the next question. You guys are ahead of the game.
I would personally say doing some level of research is really important before med school, because I think, it's important to at least do it a little bit so you can say that it's not something that, you're necessarily passionate about moving forward. But I feel like it's still important skills that you can develop. I think it's still a big component of medicine as well. I feel like research is increasingly being emphasized even at the medical student level for residency applications. So it never hurts to, try something new and then be able to comment on whether you'd want to do it more in the future. But I also agree with what's been said previously, that I don't think you need to have like concrete publications or something like that. Like it's the experience and your skill set and what your mentor can speak to in their letters that really matters.
And I would say absolutely, if you do want to do it, absolutely cold like email. That's all I did. Like finding faculty, I think, are working on things I'm interested in. Actually, that's a good point. All right.
Okay, great. Maybe we can spend a few more minutes talking about extracurriculars. I think we haven't really touched on like volunteering and maybe leadership yet. So what are some examples of volunteering opportunities that you were involved in? And is it okay if I'm volunteering for a cause that's not clinically related? And then maybe I'll just throw in like leadership too. So what are some examples of ways to get leadership experience?
I guess I can start. So again, the volunteering and all these like extracurricular activities kind of go into like um the rest of what we talked about in terms of picking and choosing what you like most and what not, so that you can actually enjoy doing it and then kind of excel like as you do it long term, kind of move up the ladder. So for example, I chose like the Cope Health Scholars Program, which was something I did at like a local hospital in Irvine during undergrad. And so after doing it like for 1 year where I did like direct patient care, it's like a little bit more than just a regular volunteer. It's more like hands-on patient care, quote unquote. But still, of course, you don't have like that scope of practice that like a med student or like a licensed medical professional would have. But still, you get your feet wet. You do like you go through like a pretty rigorous training, take an exam, so you can kind of talk about that. And then you have direct patient care, and then you have opportunity to be involved in like leadership, their leadership team. So you apply to be like coordinator position. There's different like department coordinator, different admin coordinators that you can do. So if you're interested in leadership positions there, you can do that. And then also just like in any other club or interest group that you join, as long as you're involved, you show interest and you do it like long term, I think that kind of paves the way for you to then take on leadership roles as you continue, like for more than like 6 months or to a year. So that's like another thing. And then as far as doing work that's outside of like, let's say, medicine related, I think that's also very interesting to do. So don't like limit yourself to things that are like just clinically relevant or healthcare related, because again, if it's something that is interesting or unique, that's what makes you unique and sounds interesting to the admissions committees. So don't be afraid to do things like that. And again, just like cold emails for all of the above, all, volunteer opportunities and whatnot. And just putting yourself out there, going to those fairs that are hosted on campus for like the different clubs and orgs. Every year, I think it's at like the beginning of the year. So just finding things like that or cold emails is the best way to go.
Think in terms of leadership too, definitely like working your way up in a club is a really big way to be involved, and also shows that you're really committed to something and that you like put a lot of effort towards something that you care about. And I think that's cool. Another way that I got involved with leadership, specifically at UCLA, I'm sure other schools do the same, is through the learning assistant program where you're like an undergrad TA. And that's where I found my like passion for mentorship and teaching, which was cool. I didn't expect that. But I highly recommend it. You learn a lot about like teaching others and how to lead big groups, but also how to like help people like individually, which is fun. And you can also work your way up in that program. And yeah, that was like, I learned a lot of leadership skills by being a mentor and tutor. So highly recommend.
I also, because I know that there's like this urge to look for a lot of pre-health related stuff, especially in like the volunteering aspect, but I wouldn't sleep on work, like your jobs, even if they're not related to um like health or medicine, like can say a lot about you and your work ethic and like also like your unique situations. Like there's a lot of us that come from like tough financial backgrounds and have had to work like all of undergrad or all of schooling, which has been my case. And that for me was like a really important part of my application. And it was an important part of my own leadership experience. Like I gained so much from working jobs that were like literally completely unrelated to medicine, health, science. But to me, they were like fundamental to like my experience, like as just my experience in growing up and like getting my footing and like working on my like own work ethic and my own organizational skills. And it's like all still super applicable to your application. So like don't shy away from whatever job you might have, whatever summer job, whatever like full-time school job you have, like those are all still great. Like those count as leadership and they're all still really great leadership experiences. And if you have that story to tell with those, like tell it, like don't hide that.
Like everyone already said this too, but just to add, I would actually say it's great to have non-clinical volunteering. Everybody will have some element of shadowing, clinical volunteering, and research, um, and a combination of both, right? So these admins are reading thousands of these, right? If you have something you're actually interested in, that's none of those, that's way more interesting than the 1,000 medical student talking about how they worked in a clinic, right? So like just I would say, and the way I did leadership is exactly like everybody else. I volunteered at the clubs, and then I was the co-director, whatever, and then before you know it, you're kind of like leading it. And that way you've been at it for a few, I had more time, so a few years, so that way you really know how it works. Again, can speak to it better. We're actually interested in that. So, I would say if anyone's interested in like mentorship, or teaching, that was a really, I really liked it. So, just it can be whatever you find interesting, really.
Very good points you all brought up. Okay, so maybe now we can move into some like gap year things before wrapping up, because I know we're getting close to 8. So the first question, when did you decide to take a gap year or gap years? What are some things that you can do during a gap year, and how did you plan for it if you took one or more, which I think most people do?
So I think in terms of gap year planning, I think there are a couple of considerations. If you've graduated from college and you're not sure if you want to be pre-med, you haven't done your pre-med prereqs, or if you feel like you need to do like a post-bac in order to, make up some courses, boost up your GPA, I think that gap year consideration, like that might involve taking like more than 2 to 3 gap years, because you have to like take some extra courses, also gain some like relevant work experience before applying. I think otherwise, I think most people usually take 1 to 2 gap years, mostly because, they have a couple of other activities that they'd want to do. They may need to take the MCAT after graduation, which was my case, or it's just a little hard to just figure out all of the activities and all of the theme that you want to set up for your application within the confines of 4 years of undergrad, or 3 years if you're applying straight. And so I think for a lot of us, either we have to, take additional coursework or just like build additional experience, and give us some flexibility for taking the MCAT. In terms of what you can do during the gap year, I think it really depends on what you've done during undergrad. So if you did had a very research heavy undergrad where you had like a thesis, other research experiences, you're confident you have enough research experience prior to going to med school, then I think I might consider doing something more clinically oriented, like being a medical assistant or a scribe, or like a clinical research coordinator. I personally chose the clinical research route because you can still work with patients, but also do clinical research, which is very interesting. It also pays a lot more than medical assistant or scribe jobs. I think unless things have changed, like the MA or scribe jobs tend to pay like pretty low for gap year jobs, while like I think clinical research jobs pay upwards of like $25 to $30 an hour. So important considerations in terms of saving up money for med school applications, saving up money for moving costs as you like have to plan all of that prior to entering med school. So I think those are like important considerations to have in mind. If your undergrad experience was more clinically oriented and you're confident you have enough clinical and leadership experience, then I might consider pivoting to like a junior specialist or a staff research associate role where you have more direct research experience. It's all about complementing what you already have, and also just assessing how much time you feel like you need to round out your theme for your med school applications, and just make sure that you can take the MCAT as well.
Yeah, I took technically 4 years. They were in gap years, all of them, because I wasn't really pre-med. So I did my undergrad, then I was doing a master's, which in Canada you can do a research base. So that was 2 years. In the middle of it, I realized I want to do medicine. And it's really what Vishnu was saying, that like I had done undergrad in sciences, so I had all the prereqs, hadn't done MCAT, volunteering, clinical shadowing, any of that. So it was really just, figuring out, starting as soon as you realize it. So I started in my master's to get started with those, extracurricular activities. Lucky that I had done a science-based undergrad, and then it's really about, okay, like finishing whatever you're doing, if it's a second degree or not, and then just like getting the MCAT done, making sure you have enough clinical volunteering to get strong letters from there, strong letters from your extracurriculars. So there's really not like a specific number. anything. I think 2 years is more than enough. Like, I don't think, like I did it in a not really rushed way, and 2 years was more than enough, but I'm sure you can even do it in a year, but it really depends what you're doing beforehand. So I would say, I agree with all his advice in terms of kind of like if you already know going into a gap year that you want to do medicine, but if you don't, I would just try to finish out whatever you're doing and kind of get started as soon as you can on the rest of it, and make sure you're kind of hitting all these, required ones and the things you're actually interested in to add to your application. And then once that's done, I would get started. And then the other thing is, the whole application, I'm sure most of you know this, but it takes a whole year. So you really just have like even though I had 2 years of gap, it was really just a year, right? To do all of those things, because you apply in May and then the rest of it is just a year of waiting. So you really just have that. And then I would say that the only advice I would say for someone that's a non-trad, fellow non-trads out there, is that, it's been years since you've done these courses for the MCAT. So your your study period will be probably longer than someone that's just been doing these. So, just getting back into that grind. So definitely account for that. And I would say just simultaneously try to do all your extracurriculars or research or whatever you're doing as well. So it's just a lot of, like, I would say, time management, and I'm not good at that at all, and I managed it. So you just kind of figure out how to fit your schedule and go from there, and just kind of drop some things that might not be as interesting or as important, and focus on the main things you're actually focusing on. But yeah, that would kind of be my non-trad advice.
I can speak to that too. So I took 2 gap years. One was doing a master's, and then the other I actually had already gone in and deferred. So mine was a little bit of a different pathway. But I agree. I think the application process is pretty extensive. So like it might be your gap year, but you will be pretty busy. There's a lot of essay writing, there's a lot of letters of rec to navigate, there's a lot of stuff. So like keep that in mind, like in terms of like taking your rest and like taking what you need for yourself, because it's like that year that you apply will still be pretty intense on top of whatever else you might be doing, because for a lot of us is like working, research. And I'm definitely also a really big proponent of gap years. I think that more and more schools are pushing students, honestly, to take gap years, because medical school is a pretty intense process. Like, and it's good to have a little bit of a break in between, or at least like a time to be able to do something other than school and go back. Or if it is school that you want to continue, like I did, I still ended up taking another year after that because I was pretty burnt out. So like, yeah, I would agree. Keep that in mind. I think that it will be like a tough and kind of long process, and like see where you're at. And I think everyone has like different reasons for taking gap years. And for me, like I was really interested in my master's, and wanted to advance it, my master's in public health, and wanted to like go down that field, because it's something I care about. But I also ended up taking the deferral year because I was so burnt out, because I was also working multiple jobs while doing it and applying. So by the time I got in, I don't think that my first year would have gone very smoothly if I had gone in directly either. So know that deferral is an option. I wouldn't like use it as your tool for a gap year either, though. Like you do have to go through a process, you have to get it approved, you have to get official letters, like you have to get support for why you would ask for it. So don't use that as like your backup. But there are options if like you come to it and it was a crazy year for you, and maybe your gap years didn't plan out as you wanted, and like that it's also a possibility.
Great. We have 5 more minutes. Maybe I want to squeeze in like a more simple question before we finish. And that's just about like, when should I start writing these sections for the application? Like, how long did it take you? Should I budget like months, weeks? What do you guys think?
I would say when budgeting time, I mean, I'm also just a huge planner with things, probably to a fault, I think, but that's just how I approach situations like this. I think I started probably 2 to 3 months before early June was when I really got into it, and I had already started thinking about it beforehand, and that was when I started making a school list, and I think just like drafting my personal statement a couple of times. It's going to take at least like 7 or 8 iterations before you feel confident that you're ready to submit. And then I also gave it to two of my friends to look at. So I think one took a look, I think draft 2 or 3, and then another one took a look like closer down. I personally didn't choose to send it to more than 2 people because I was worried I'd be lost in too many people's preferences. So just 2 people that I trusted to look over the personal statement. And that process also takes some time because you also have to give those people time to look over your statement and leave comments. Same thing with, the activity section as well. Just want to like comb through it for typos, comb through it for like proper wording and all of those sorts of things. So starting early definitely doesn't hurt. And then I think like after you submit your primary application, like you have a little bit of time before secondaries start kicking in July. So my recommendation would be take some time to unwind and relax. But if you feel like you have the bandwidth, you can also start pre-writing secondaries for, universities that operate on a more rolling basis. But I think in general, with admissions being as rolling as it is and making sure your application gets verified quickly and submitted on time, I think it's just important to make sure that you give yourself a good 2 to 3 month period before the applications are due, so you don't end up submitting too late and then it takes too long to get verified.
I think it also just depends on you. Like I have friends who started writing their personal statement in December, which is like 6 months, 7 months in advance. I personally started writing mine in like February-ish, but that was just because I like had so many experiences that I felt like were so meaningful to who I am as a person and that I wanted to write about in my personal statement, and I couldn't decide which one to use. And so I wrote like 5 different, completely different versions of my personal statement until finally like picking one and then like editing that version. So it just depends on like I think how confident you are in what you want to write about. Because for me personally, just like writing down what I felt was like the most beneficial for me. In terms of work and activities, I think the 3 most meaningful experiences that you pick, it probably took me like a month to finalize those, and then the rest of the work and activities I spent less time on. I probably started working on those in like April, May, and I spent the most of my time on my personal statement.
I would agree. I
think
mean, oh, go ahead. Go.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. I just wanted to, just for the procrastinators out there, not all of us are disorganized. I wrote my MCAT end of April and then really just did all of my app during May, still submitted on time. I was not working during May. I would definitely not recommend this, but I would say that you can get it done and still get into medical school. So you just have to work really hard that during May and just not have anything else that you're working on. Just putting that out there. But I was working full time in the summer, so all of my secondaries I would have to wake up like 5 a.m. and write, work full time, come home, and then write it at night. So, I would say that I could have probably planned better for to make sure that I didn't know secondaries I could find online. So you can find them online. Just, if you have the time, look ahead and start working on your 3 or 4 main essays. But otherwise, I would say this is wonderful advice. But if you happen to be like me, so get done and get in. So, but like, it's the right way to do it. But some of us just never become schedulers, even at the end of the day. And it still works out. It's okay as long as you have a framework.
And then I'll go quickly since I know we're at time, but I will say sometimes honestly giving yourself too much time makes it worse because like I know some people also like same as what Heidi was saying, like they like gave themselves like a year to write their essay. And sometimes it's kind of worse because then I feel like you're doing it in chunks. You're not fully completing it because you're like, okay, I have a year. I have all this time to prepare. Like sometimes it's just better to get something down on paper immediately and then go with those revisions. Because it's just daunting to be like, okay, I have this year. I'm gonna keep working on this. I have to keep doing this for like a year. Like so like a lot of time. Same thing with sometimes with like the MCAT studying. So yeah, I would give yourself some ample time. I also took about 3 months to write it. And then I will say I'll definitely always plug like graduate writing centers at your schools. Tufts had a great one, and they also had one for alumni when they had graduated. Take advantage of those resources, and like if you want the same person reviewing it, you could probably request like the same tutor if that's someone that you like. Because I took advantage of those just especially for like grammatical things like sentence structure. Like don't sleep on that because like your family and your friends who you trust will be great, but it'll also be nice to have like more professional advice, I guess. I thought it was super beneficial. And as for secondaries, like I second Farinaz because I also was working a ton while I was doing secondaries, and it was also like a 5 a.m. or like get home and work till like 11 and write and write and write. Sometimes it's going to be unavoidable if that's what your schedule is and that's what your lifestyle is like allowing at the moment, because like it just is what it is. But I do think that taking a little break between first like primaries and secondaries is nice. And I did take a break, but what I actually did was I made sure to set up my essays. So like I found them all online and set them up and then like kind of sorted them in big general topics. So I could kind of like write one essay for that big topic and then be able to modify it through my secondaries. That helped me a ton. And that was something that my graduate writing tutor like person suggested, and was like one of those things that got me through secondaries like so much more efficiently. So I recommend something like that. At least just a plan, even if you're not going to like immediately start writing after you've submitted your primaries.
Thank you all for that. And yeah, as Farnaz also mentioned in the chat, MedMentors also has an essay editing section where med students can edit your essays. So if you're going to be applying soon, or if you have some essays that you'd like to get some feedback on, definitely consider using that service. But okay, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you all so much for participating and asking so many questions live. It's always so fun when people send in questions. And thank you to all of the panelists for being here and taking the time to share your advice. All right, everyone, I'm going to end the meeting. Have a good night and the rest of the week. Bye.